Yes, welcome in. Transfer portal officially opened yesterday. All the Badgers that we had talked about before are in there, along with a few more, including a quarterback, Tyler Van Dyke, headed to another school after his season obviously did not go well. Jesse, what was your favorite moment of the Tyler Van Dyke era in Madison?
Hard to find many moments from the actual season, considering he only played in 2 games plus less than one full series against Alabama. I'd probably go with something that happened in preseason practice because he did show a lot of promise, and obviously just feel bad for Tyler and the way that it went down here. It's certainly not what anybody anticipated, and hopefully he's able to find a place for him and able to recover just to put himself in position to be able to play in his final year of college eligibility.
Yeah, I wasn't taking a shot at him, of course. I did, I feel bad for him and everything like that. But this is what happens with the 1 year transfer sometimes when things don't go well and you get hurt early, and it's as if you were really never here. And unfortunately for Tyler, that's kind of what it was going to be. We'll talk about him a little bit more in detail, but really what Wisconsin does the quarterback spot here moving forward here in a second. Also, we'll get into the guys that are staying, and that includes Jake Renfro and Daryl Peterson. We'll talk about those two as well. And then get into the 2023 class, which I believe is now down to 4 guys. And was not a great class, or has yet to be a great class. A couple of guys that may end up being significant contributors throughout their entire career, but I know Jesse's going to be writing about that for tomorrow, and so we'll get a little bit of a tease there as to what he's going to be writing for up at the Athletic tomorrow. And then we'll also get into some portal targets, some of the guys that Wisconsin is targeting and the positions they're targeting. We'll get into all that. Before we do, as always, Home Field Apparel is the official apparel sponsor of the camp. They have the best vintage gear you can possibly find in the game. And as I've said a number of times, there's Wisconsin struggles on the football field have maybe made you less inclined to go out and buy Wisconsin stuff this holiday season. Well, there's probably people in your life that have loves for other colleges, and they have every single college possible up there at homefieldapparel.com. So go check them out. Use the promo code Bucky24 for 15% off your first purchase. All right, let's dive into the news that came out yesterday. That was Tyler Van Dyke announcing, or I should say the news broke. He has yet to officially, I guess, announce it, but as we're sitting here on late Tuesday morning, has yet to do it. But he's going to the transfer portal, meaning his time at Wisconsin's done after, less than a year, and really 2 games plus a drive.
Yeah, this frankly has felt inevitable for quite some time, and it is nobody's fault, certainly not Tyler's fault for getting hurt, and really not Wisconsin's fault, because when these two decided to partner here, it was a 1-year arrangement. And with the torn ACL, Wisconsin was in a spot where, I've said this before, you're going into year 3 under Luke Fickell. He's 13-13 overall, 8-10 in the Big Ten. Certainly quarterback play is a massive priority to help upgrade this program. You need certainty. And because of the timing and nature of Tyler's injury, there was not going to be that certainty with him. He was not going to be able to participate in spring practices, and there were no guarantees about whether he would be available for the start of preseason practices in August, which would be about 11 months after the injury, less than 11 months, and the start of the season. Everybody recovers from an ACL injury differently. We've seen anywhere from 6 to 12 months. Those 6 is certainly on the early side. And because of those circumstances, it just was not going to be in the best interest for Wisconsin's future to have him here. Luke did talk about the challenge of this a week ago during signing day when he was asked about what Tyler's future could be. He said he'd already met with Tyler once during the bye week and planned to speak with him again later that day. And he just said because of the timing, he called it pretty vague. So I'm not surprised that this is the direction that things ended up heading. And it's unfortunate for Tyler, but it's just the reality of the situation.
Yeah, they couldn't count on him. I think that's just straight up what it is. Couldn't count on it. And for what we saw from him, I don't know that, if he had been fantastic in those couple of games, would it have been different? Would they have maybe been more willing to wait had he been fantastic and had been the quarterback of 2021? Do they maybe have a different view of this?
I honestly don't believe so. And to me, it's more about you needed to know. Look, if he was great and you knew he was going to be that great quarterback next season, you would be willing to to stick it out. But again, it just goes back to having no idea. And it's not a question, frankly, that anybody can answer. Doctors can't answer it. Tyler can't answer it because it's a long rehab process. And even if you are cleared, it doesn't mean you're going to be the player that you were before. So, no, I don't think it has anything to do with how he performed or how he could have performed. It's simply about needing some certainty. And as we stand now, this opens the door for Wisconsin to pursue a transfer portal quarterback for a third consecutive offseason. It's not what Luke Fickell wanted to do. He mentioned this, I believe, the last night in Platteville when he was asked about the long-term future of quarterback play. He wanted to be able to develop players, and they have guys that they can try to do that with, but they also need some help, and in particular, veteran help and experience in the room.
And that is the thing that they're after for a third straight year. As you mentioned, they're going to have a different starter in a home opener, or I should say a season opener for a fourth straight year, which again, it's not necessarily the way you want to go about it, but this is where the conversation happened after the news yesterday. And it was, I don't want another transfer portal quarterback. These are mentions. These are things that were said to me on Twitter and everything else. I don't want another transfer portal quarterback. Just let Carter Smith and Maber Matoyer go at it. I'm going to have to cut off my leg if Braden Lock is the quarterback. Like I'm never going to watch another game if Braden Lock's the quarterback. Like those are the things right now, but I don't think, and this is because I get where people are coming from with the idea of letting Carter Smith and Maber Matoyer battle out, and whoever's better should play. Just throw them to the wolves, whatever it is. I understand that thinking. And I think if it's college football 25 or 26, whatever, yes. But Luke Fickell needs to win games. Luke Fickell and his staff need to win games to save jobs. This is not let's plan for 2026. This is let's plan for 2025 and give us the best chance to win games. That's how they have to think about this. And so while nobody wants to see another one-year transfer, if it gives them the best chance to win games next year, and I'm looking at that schedule, and me personally, I don't see a ton of opportunities to win games unless they get a top-level quarterback and all of a sudden things change. But Luke Fickell is not thinking about 2026 at this point. He's thinking about 2025, even though a lot of fans are kind of skipping over next year and looking at the schedule in 2026 and saying, ooh, that sets up pretty nicely. Who knows what 2026 will even bring? Will the Big Ten even look like the Big Ten right now? Like, you just never know. So I look at what they'd have to do in the portal, and this isn't easy. It's going out and finding a experienced, productive veteran that can fit into what Jeff Grimes wants to do with his offense. And you know what the problem is? Everybody's looking for an experienced veteran guy who can extend plays with his legs and is going to come in and be a difference maker on their offense. Unfortunately, everybody's looking for that right now. And so I don't envision them throwing those two guys to the wolves at this point. I think they're going to do everything in their power to find one or two, maybe an older guy and a younger guy that they can put in that room.
It's a delicate balance that this staff has to strike, much like all other staffs in college football. But as it relates to Wisconsin, they are in the business of winning now. Maybe it would be different if they hadn't been so inconsistent these last 2 years, or average, or slightly below average.
You say that you give them a little credit there. A little too much credit there.
Inconsistent was doing a lot of work in that sentence. But the point is, you don't want to be in a spot where you go 3-9 and essentially you're sacrificing a season. I also would say, whether people want to roll their eyes or not, that's not really fair to everybody else on the team. Guys who are working as hard as they are, maybe have 1 year left because you think that a season that doesn't go the way you want it to will provide the experience necessary for 2026. That's not how it works. And I know I received this question a lot at the end of the season. I know you did too, about why isn't Maber Matoyer playing? Can't be any worse than Braden Lock. Even if it doesn't go well now, he's got to get that experience. Luke has said he can't know what you have in a quarterback until he plays, but Phil Longo was adamant about this, and I think Luke must have felt the same way because they had 2 games without Longo running the offense, that he was just not at the level that Braden was based on what they'd seen in practice. And you have to earn your opportunities. So I totally understand the idea behind wanting to see a young guy play and develop, but they're in the business of winning now, and they have to do what they think is going to give the team the best chance to win right now. That's why I think spring ball is going to be so fascinating. Now, yes, there's going to be a transfer portal quarterback presumably in there, but I really want to see Whether Mabry takes a big jump, we haven't had a chance to see him since maybe the third week of August, and that was before he was getting all the backup snaps. When I talked to Mabry, he said the split was essentially like 55% for the starters and 45% for the backups. And when you were the number 3, this is in practice at least, when you're the number 3, you weren't getting anything. So maybe he's made a big leap. We know Carter Smith is a top 15 4-star quarterback, but with the transfer portal, we have to be honest about the situation because you can't talk about the portal without acknowledging NIL and the financial means that Wisconsin has. The challenge as reporters covering this is, unlike the NFL, where you've got the hard and fast numbers, teams have salary caps, you know what the contracts are. We don't have access to that. They don't have to share it. And so it is going to be multi-millions of dollars to get the best quarterback. And the problem is all these other teams are trying to do that as well. I think about Dylan Gabriel going from Oklahoma to Oregon and the way that a player at that high of a level can transform your team. Oregon was very good before, and then they got a guy who's a Heisman Trophy finalist and has Oregon at 13-0 and is the number 1 team in the college football playoff. I'm not saying Wisconsin is going to get a player of that caliber, but they're going to need to pay some money to get a quality quarterback. And I would also be interested to see, is it a guy that just has 1 year of eligibility, or is it somebody that has even 2 or 3? Because I also think that may change the equation of what that quarterback room could look like moving forward.
And why is that?
Because guys aren't going to want to stick it out. And if you are a redshirt freshman or a true freshman and someone's already playing ahead of you and has 2 or 3 years left, quarterback out of every other position is the one that I think is the biggest carousel of, because only one guy can play at a time.
Yeah, it's a major problem. And that's, again, why you bring in that 1 year guy. It kind of gives guys behind him at least a thought that I'm going to have a chance next year. Now, again, this would be the second year that maybe would be like, all right, well, I'm not playing this year, which is, is that something he's okay with? The other thing about this is who are the quarterbacks in that room that fit what they want to do right now?
Well, I would think Carter Smith, certainly. Every program's looking for a dual threat guy. He can certainly make all the throws and he can definitely run the ball. And then to a slightly lesser degree, maybe Retire's got a different type of body, but he's physical and he can run. I don't think you can say that about Braden Lock or Landon Lock. And of course, Landon is coming off a torn ACL that he suffered during his senior season. So there's another guy that you're not going to be able to see in spring practice as he recovers from an injury. So I would say you want more of the mobile quarterbacks, but we also don't fully know what the plan is going to be here with Jeff Grimes, though we certainly have a sense based on what he's done at his past stops and based on what Luke Fickell said he wanted. And they also need to hire a quarterbacks coach, which is going to play into this as well. Maybe he's got a guy in mind that he wants to bring.
Is Braden Lock still on this team come fall camp?
Man, that is, at this point, I suppose I will say yes. I also wonder, it's hard to know what he wants. I know I said this because I asked him at the end of the Minnesota game whether he thought he would be here or planned to be here in January when the team reconvened. And he was pretty unequivocal in his response because of how much he enjoys being here and he wants to give it a shot. He's already transferred once. And I do wonder if he were to do it again, where he would end up. You know, you're in a Big Ten program in a pretty decent situation. And even if he's not the starter, if you bring in one guy, I would think he's going to be the backup next year. And that backup opportunity has gotten him 12 starts to date. Now, maybe something will change. But at this point, I'm going to say yes. But I'll never rule out guys leaving because that spring portal window is going to give people an opportunity to see where they stand, at least for the first part of practices.
Yeah, I think he sticks around until spring, or at least spring. But I've been very clear about how I view him as a quarterback, and I think he's just at a level too high for him right now. And I think he could play at a little bit of a lower level. And if he wants to play and not be questioned and not try to be replaced every single off season, that may be the better choice. But he's at a Big Ten school right now. You're right. And do you really just want to readily give that up? Especially with the new offensive coordinator coming in, he's got a blank slate at least to work with him. But when you look at Jeff Grimes and the best offenses that he's produced, it's been a quarterback that has had some maneuverability. And we know that is not Braden Lock's game as much as he wants to try and work on it. It's not. So what are you going to say?
there's also something to be said for being able to play on a college team with your brother. How many other opportunities are going to present themselves where
Play?
there's a school to be a part of a team with your brother, right? Like, how many other opportunities are going to present themselves where there's going to be 2 scholarship quarterback spots available? And you can do that. Like, you can debate the merits of the quality of play, but I'm just trying to think of it from his perspective and what it would mean to be here. Yeah, he wants to play. He also, I think, probably wants to be a coach in the future. And maybe if you stay, you have more equity in a certain place and you can understand a new offense and be in a program with your brother. So again, I'm not speaking to whether he should be out there on the field. I'm speaking to what the thought process would be in deciding whether it's worthwhile to stay at Wisconsin.
I mean, I think there'd probably be quite a few people would be okay with him being a coach next fall.
Ouch. 13 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. Could have been worse.
I mean, was he better this year or last year? He had a few good games, right? Like obviously the Purdue game and the Rutgers game.
Yeah.
I think those are the only two. I wouldn't say the Northwestern game was a good one for him. Wasn't horrible. I mean, I thought he was pretty good against Nebraska as well. Like he had three good games, three games that you could sit there and say, oh, okay. He also, this is putting way too much on him, but he also lost the Penn State game for him. I know that's totally unfair, but that interception was a killer. Mm-hmm. And the Oregon game was right there for the taking multiple times. Couldn't finish that. So there are moments that I think he probably would like to have back. The Minnesota game, you had more batted passes than first downs in the first half.
Yeah, 3-3. I think it was a tie game on that front, but
see, I know what you said, and we talked. I'm not going to get into it. Doesn't matter.
I'm not advocating for him to play. I want to make this very clear. Like they need better quarterback play. We saw a 9-game starting sample size. He's 4-8 in 12 games as a starter. I get the competition has been challenging and the circumstances haven't been ideal. But if you want to get this program to where you say you think you want to get it to, or even close to it, you need better than 55% completion rate and all these batted passes. And you just need a difference maker if you're able to find it.
Yeah. Again, difficult to do. Even more difficult, I think, is finding the young guy that wants to sit and develop. So like if you get the 1-year guy is tough. The multi-year guy who's going to sit and doesn't have any guarantees to playing time is probably even as maybe even tougher, especially when you're looking at Mabry and Carter Smith on the roster. So finding that young guy is probably going to be very difficult as well. But hey, that's what they get paid to do. Get paid to find some guys and get this team back into a better spot because they do have some guys returning. And Jake Renfro is one of them. And we already knew about Riley Mahlman. And then obviously Darrell Peterson, outside linebacker, also announced that he's staying. So the offensive line should have 3 of the 5 starters back. Obviously, you got to replace Joe Huber, and you probably got to play. And you do have to replace Jack Nelson, so your left tackle and your right guy and your right guard. But you have Joe Brunner back at left guard, Renfro at center, and Riley Mahlman at right tackle. It's a good spot to start from, I think, going into next year. With if they find the right quarterback, they have a lot of talent coming back on the offensive side of the ball that I shouldn't say a lot of talent, a lot of potential talent coming back on the offensive side of the ball. You lose Tretch, you lose Tywee. There's some other guys.
This offensive line better be the group you can lean on next season. And I know Luke said he wanted that to be the case this year. Sure. But with the experience and the talent they have behind them, and finally, let's acknowledge a second-year offensive line coach at Wisconsin, because that has to be part of it. Okay, you overhaul the system, you bring in Jack Bicknell Jr. He's gone after a year. I think A.J. Blazek did some really good things in year 1, though. Of course, to the naked eye, it can be tough in the game to understand what's happening. I'll fully acknowledge that. But they've got the 3 returning starters. Presumably, Kevin Haywood would be a starting tackle based on what he showed and the promise that they think he has. Maybe JP Benchwall is the starting right guard, but there are some other options. They have a couple veterans, guys we haven't necessarily seen a ton of. Jack Nelson's younger brother, Barrett Nelson. Leighton Nelson was a transfer that came over from Vanderbilt but suffered a season-ending injury, so we didn't see him. But he has familiarity at Vanderbilt being with A.J. Blazek. And, of course, they signed 10 scholarship offensive linemen in the last 2 classes. I don't necessarily expect the true freshman to play a ton. It's very rare, but someone like Emerson Mandel, will he be in the mix? So there's a lot to like about that group. And I know that it wasn't a classic O-line this past season, but they did rank tied for third in the Big Ten for fewest sacks allowed per game with a quarterback that wasn't particularly mobile. So I do think that they at least did some good things, even if it didn't come together every game. But having a guy like Renfro matters a lot. I think he's a very good leader. He certainly projects a lot of positivity when he talks to us, but he seems like the kind of guy that people gravitate toward. And he has plenty of familiarity playing football, at least at a high level at Cincinnati and understanding Luke Fickell. And now he has a full year of starting experience at Wisconsin. I thought he was always going to come back because he talked in recent weeks about, I think he was asked more about whether you'd consider leaving for the NFL, though it was just, would you consider staying or leaving, how much he likes this place and trusts the vision that Fickell has. And that matters.
It does. No, it definitely does. I don't know that he was ready for, again, I'll leave the studying of the offensive line to people that are much more know much more about the offensive line than I do. So I will not say that. I think he may have been dealing with a little bit of an injury towards the end of the season because he got replaced against Minnesota. The snaps looked a little off against Minnesota, at least. And Joe Huber went and replaced him in the second half of that game. So getting him back, though, is significant. And it's hopefully for his sake, he's got an entire offseason of not having to worry about anything else other than playing football, right? Like there have been a few off seasons. I think last year was one of them where he was able to just focus on football and not have to like be rehabbing anything for the most part. But the previous ones, he was always rehabbing. He got hurt in spring, his first spring here. So like and then obviously in fall camp again. So hopefully he can just keep a healthy off season. And I think maybe we get an even better Jake Renfro next year for sure. And then Darrell Peterson, look, Darrell did not have the season that he wanted. I don't think he had the season. I don't think anybody at outside linebacker had the season that they wanted. But when you go from 10 tackles for loss and 4.5 sacks down to 1 tackle for loss and 1 sack, that is not the season that you wanted. But getting him back, if you can figure out a way to get that back to that production from 2023, it's a big add back in.
Yeah, I think so. I heard some rumblings from fans about him coming back and saying, I'd rather get a portal guy. And that's all fair. They are going to pursue portal players, which we will discuss at almost every position, including trying to get better edge rushers. But there's something to be said for getting a guy back that has that much experience, multi-year starter. And it's not like he's had no success ever here. I think it's Mike Tressel's job to look at 2 years of this sample size and figure out, well, how do we get him to be the type of player that he was 2 years ago? I know they transitioned him to a little bit different role this season. We saw him, especially on some pass rushing third and medium long type situations. They would put his hand in the ground like he was lined up like a defensive end. And it obviously didn't lead to more production for him. I think he has it in him, but Tressel's got to figure out a way to best utilize him. And what I think will be some tweaking of this front where they want to have bigger bodies. It's just hard to know exactly what that looks like. It doesn't sound like it's going to be a straight up overhaul to like a 4-down lineman or this 3-3-5 system that Tressel did when he was at Cincinnati.
Yeah, no, it's size, right? It's figuring out a way because you can't give up 329 yards rushing. And I don't know that you need to just completely overreact to that. What you need to react to is the fact that it wasn't just the Iowa game. The fact that they put up 329 is the one that stands out, but they have not stopped the run well. I should say they've stopped the run rarely here these first 2 years. If you take the sacks out, 5 different teams ran for 200 plus yards last year against them. This year it was even worse. I mean, they were finished like 90th something in the country against the run. 3 years ago, they were the number 1 rush defense in the country. Now some of that is talent, right? The guys that were playing defensive line in 2021 were pretty freaking good. And the guys who were playing inside linebacker are pretty freaking good. And the outside linebackers, not too bad, right? So that certainly the talent comes into it, but I think it certainly stands up and we look at the defensive line and we can talk about the lack of tackles for loss and big plays from the outside linebackers because that was certainly a story, and the inside linebackers maybe not making the plays that we've seen from inside linebackers before at Wisconsin. But the fact that, let's just say what it is, the defensive line didn't do its job for much of the year. Their job was to, and this was a change. You heard Kurt Neal kind of talk about it in your exit interview. as opposed to trying to go create chaos, which is what they were trying to do when they first showed up. The job was to hold up blocks, the linebackers to go make plays, which was always the type of style of defense that Jim Leonard and Dave Aranda and Justin Wilcox had. That's why you never saw huge numbers from defensive linemen, whether it's TFLs or sacks. That just wasn't what the defensive line in that defense was asked to do. This defense, and this year, the guys that were out there just didn't get it done. And that's not absolving the other guys on the defense for, not playing well, but it starts with stopping the run starts with the defensive line. They didn't do it. And now you've got to find some bodies up there that can do it. And we can talk about quarterback, but defensive line is right there in terms of finding something in the transfer portal, because you need big bodies. And we've seen that with some of the offers, but you need big bodies that are willing to play their role. And I think a guy like Ben Barton's a guy that's willing to play his role. Kurt Neal is a guy that I don't think was willing to play his role anymore.
It's always hard to determine the percentage of the pie here on the talent and the scheme. I don't think that you're right. Look at the talent a few years ago. And we should acknowledge, they played some really good opponents. But you know what? They also played some really good opponents at various stages over the last decade. And this was a team this year that ended up allowing 165 yards rushing per game, which is nowhere near the standard and is not going to win you very many games when you rank in the 90s. I think 8 out of the 9 years before Mike Tressel got here, the defense averaged allowing fewer than 100 yards per game. And that Iowa game is always going to stand out. It's not like this was an Iowa team that was 11-1 and is in the college football playoff. They lost to some teams that show you that they shouldn't have rushed for 329 yards against Wisconsin, especially when you knew exactly what the Hawkeyes were going to do. It was just the biggest indictment to me on where this defense was. And they know they need to get better, but it's one thing to know, and it's another thing to go get those players and make sure you put yourself in a position to succeed next year.
And it also just felt like the unwillingness to adapt within the game itself. That was tough. And Mike Tressel asked him about it, and he said, we did some things, and that's fine. That running game for Iowa was really good.
It is
like especially the lead back and
Caleb Johnson.
Yeah, but they didn't have a passing game to speak of. And for you to continually just put I don't want to say smaller, but you can talk about your heavy nickel package. You didn't play it very much, and for you to continue to put out the smaller. Whatever that doesn't matter. They need to be bigger, and they know that, and that's why certain some of these guys are some of the offers that they have out are certainly bigger guys. We'll talk about the 23 class, but like a guy like Jamel Howard, can you please, like, if you're Wisconsin, can you please take a jump? Can you please, because you're a big boy, you're tough to move. You should be tough to move, I should say. Can he be that? Can he take a step in year 3? Certainly hoping, right? They certainly have to be hoping.
And while we're at it, we should mention there's another guy leaving on the way out, since we're.
Yep, I was just about to do that, but go ahead.
I stole your segue.
Nope, go for it.
Riley Nowakowski announcing late Monday night that he's going to transfer for his last year. Had 11 catches, 71 yards this past season, was an integral part of the offense in terms of the snaps and opportunities that he got the last 2 seasons. But that's at least notable because it's an in-state guy who was here for 5 years.
Oh, it's definitely notable. I don't know that a lot of people were expecting him or like, is he coming back or not? This isn't like Ricardo Hallman, like wondering whether he's going to come back or not. But Riley Nowakowski gave them a lot of good football, and he was a guy that maybe one of the last of his kind. Maybe this is just a little over the top, but like a walk-on, started on defense, then moved over to fullback, and then got moved to tight end. He is an in-state guy, one of just 2 of the in-state scholarship guys that are a part of this group that went to the portal along with Nate White. So it is, I think it's it's certainly notable. I will say the one thing about, I talk about the quarterbacks and not throwing them to the wolves. When it comes to other positions, especially tight end, I'd like to see Grant Steck. I'd like to see Robert Booker. I'd like to see some of the younger guys. And I think certainly maybe that's what Wisconsin had to say about it as well. But it's also possible, Riley Nowakowski was just ready to move on and find it somewhere other to play, because a lot of the guys that he came in with are not here anymore. And yeah, you move on. And so, but hey, I think he lived the dream that he wanted to live, and that was playing football for the home state school. And it probably didn't go the way he always wanted it to go, but he's going to having one more opportunity to go somewhere and maybe make a bigger impact than he potentially could at Wisconsin. So, all right. So that's the players that are leaving. Let's excuse me, players that are staying and leaving, I guess, throw them both in there. But the 2023 class down to 4 members. You're going to be writing about this for Wednesday. You've had a chance to talk to a number of these guys and try and get an idea of why they're leaving. Some of them, I feel like it's different for various guys, but they are down to 4. Do you have that list of 4 guys? Right? It's right off the top of your head. Really?
Right off the top of my head.
Go for it.
Yeah. So they've still got Jamel Howard, the aforementioned defensive lineman, Tucker Ashcraft at tight end, and then they've got the 2 inside linebackers, Tyler Janzi and Christian Allegro, who came in at the outside. But 4 out of 15, pretty low percentage. I had a chance to talk to 5 of the 11 that are gone, 2 of them left before the season. Jordan Mayer left, AJ Tisdale, the cornerback, left. 9 have left in the last month, and 8 since the Sunday after the regular season ended. And of those 9, I've talked to 5. So the quarterback, Cole LaCrue, offensive lineman, James Durand, Tretch Kekahuna, and Amari Snowden and Jace Arnold, a couple of the cornerbacks. I think the overarching theme here is where we're at in the transfer portal era. And I'm not knocking anybody. They have this right. There's no penalty for leaving. But I think now more than ever, if you are a young guy and you do not see playing time in the first 2 years, or a path to more playing time in year 3, you are out of here, because it's not the way that it once was, where you're just going to stick around for 4 and 5 years and wait your turn. And in year 4, you're going to be a starter. And year 3, you're going to be a bit player. All these guys, other than Tretch Kekahuna, are leaving because they did not get opportunities. Tretch played 300 plus snaps this past season. Everybody else that's leaving played 12 or fewer snaps, offensively or defensively. There were some that got a handful of special team snaps, but that's not why they came here, to play special teams. Jonas Duclona played 12 snaps. Jace Arnold played 11 snaps. Amari Snowden played 3. James Durand played 3, and that was 3 more than Nate White and Cole LaCrue got to play. So I also think you're in the business as a staff of getting the best players you can every year. And sometimes a younger guy is going to leapfrog you. Xavier Lucas comes to mind. He played 200 plus snaps this year, and that meant he was taking away opportunities from guys like Snowden and Arnold. And that has a lot to do with why people are leaving. So yes, everyone leaves for a little bit different reason. We talked about this on a previous show. Amari Snowden was less than enthusiastic about the relationship that he said that he had with cornerbacks coach Paul Haynes. But I want to point out that's not a universally held belief, because I asked Jace Arnold about that, and he said he had a pretty solid relationship with him. I just think it comes down to what your role is. And these guys aren't coming here to just hang out and watch from the sideline for 2 and 3 seasons.
Tretch is part of that, though, too, right?
Yeah, I think obviously that's the one that feels like, if you're a fan, that hurts the most because of what the potential playmaking ability was and what he showed. His situation is a little bit different because, like I said, he played more than any of these other guys that are on the way out, but he wasn't happy with the playing time that he got and wanted a bigger role. And he held a lot of stuff back, I could tell from when we were talking. But he did say, when he met with Luke Fickell after the season, one of the conversations they had was, Luke said they were going to play the 3 best wide receivers. And this is according to Tretch, but he said that he was going to start next season. Now, I don't know whether that's accurate, because if I'm looking at that, would you have started, if you had 3 receivers out there, would you have put Will Pauling and Tretch Kekahuna both on the field with Vinny Anthony? I don't know. I certainly think the fact that Will Pauling was out there taking away some of those opportunities from Tretch is not something Tretch wanted, but he feels like he can go anywhere and start. And when I said, well, was it hard to walk away if you were told you were going to start next year? He had one word answer. He said, no. So I think it was very clear he was not happy with what his role was. He said, every time I touch the ball, I make plays, and my opportunities were limited. So that's how he felt about the situation. And that's why it's so hard. I think in general, I think we could both agree he should have gotten more opportunities because of what was possible, though he certainly had some limitations that he demonstrated. But even when you play a guy, sometimes he's not happy with what he's getting.
Yeah, I mean, look at what Luke Fickell, though, said about, some of these guys are not leaving for any other reason, that maybe they've got 2 other NFL wide receivers there. So that was, I think that was obviously a point towards Tretch, right? Like it was, those 2 guys are are big time players, at least in the staff's mind. And I think certainly Vinny Anthony proved that, and Will Pauling proved it last year. He didn't have the season that he wanted this year, certainly, well, injury wise, drops wise, all that stuff. And you're right, Tretch did have some limitations. He's a small dude. He's small. And he may not have always been the best route runner. But in those cases, when you have a guy like that, you figure out a way to get him the ball in different ways. And I don't know that they did. They always did a great job of that this year. That would be one of my bigger critiques. But again, it's like, okay, that type of stuff is going to happen. Sometimes sometimes guys think they deserve more. And, if we're being honest, maybe he did.
Yeah, maybe he did. But I don't know. I look at most of those players and I wonder, well, what was the path forward even next year? The one of the guys that left, and I wish I would have had a chance to talk to him, but it's fine. People don't owe me anything if they don't want to respond. But Braden Moore felt like he was going to have a bigger role next year. I don't know what it'd have looked like, but I was surprised when I was looking at the snap counts and he only played 10 snaps this season. Because I felt like he was in a good position. And I think the other thing here we should acknowledge, this was a transitional recruiting class. Luke Fickell was hired 23 days before that signing period, and a lot of those guys were committed under the previous staff. But I also don't think you can just make this blanket statement and say, oh, it didn't fit, and these guys signed on for something different. James Durand actually played in an air raid system in high school. And when I remember, I went back and looked at my story when he was coming in. This better fit what he wanted to do. His high school coach took the concepts that Phil Longo ran because he became enamored of Longo when he was at Sam Houston. And so, it should have been a better fit. And Tretch decommitted, but came back because Luke and the staff pursued him. And 3 of these defensive backs committed to Fickell at Cincinnati and followed him to Wisconsin: Duclona, Moore, and Snowden. So it's not just, all these guys, they weren't Luke Fickell guys. That can be the case to some degree, no doubt about it. But I just think it's sort of a cautionary tale of sorts about where we are in the transfer portal era. It's certainly easy to get excited about these latest recruiting classes in 2024 and 2025, where you've got 19 4-star prospects, but you also need to figure out a way to play them early. And that's a balance that the staff has to consistently strike.
It does. And it's also a fact is you stop picking places because of coaches, even though that is what a lot of guys do. The Cincinnati guys that came with him. Now, Amari had been here before. He was recruited by the previous staff, right? Like the biggest problem was it didn't have baseball. If I remember correctly, if I remember that recruitment correctly.
Yeah, I can't remember why he didn't want to come here initially, but he believed in Fickell so much that he did come here. And I think I said this before, wherever he goes next, he said he was going to keep that avenue open. So maybe he will ultimately play two sports somewhere. But yeah, that's a tough one, I think, just because when you look at potential, but obviously he wasn't happy. And I also think too, is a difference between leaving because you're not playing and leaving because you think Fickell's vision sucks. Because I think some people wonder that too. Oh, everyone's jumping ship. This program is a disaster. Well, you could say that it may be for other reasons, but I do feel like it's important to note that most of these guys said that they really like Fickell as a coach. They like what he's been able to do and have belief in the future. And Snowden is right there at the front. He said, I will root for him and Coach Tress till the wheels fall off. The man wins. Look at what he did at Cincinnati. Look at his damn wrestling record. I just think that those guys are leaving simply because they don't see a path forward for themselves, not because they think Wisconsin's program is a fiery train wreck, if that makes sense.
They don't think it's a dumpster fire. It's not like they're watching the dumpster fire like go down the flooded street, right? That gif that usually comes out for dumpster fires. But the thing about transitional classes, I know you probably didn't have a chance to go back and look at some of the other classes, like a 2015 class, right? That was Paul Chris, that he had a month to, I guess back then he had multiple months, right? Because signing day wasn't until February. So I think, maybe it's a little bit different than what Fickell walked into, where it was like a month, it was less than a month later. But you go back and look at that class, and the top 3 guys in that class were Kevin Estes, never played; Kyle Peniston, finished his career elsewhere; Arrington Farrar finished his career elsewhere. There were some big-time hits in that class, like John Dietz was a multi-time starter, but he was also a Wisconsin kid. David Edwards, obviously, a tight end in high school, and then came through and turned into I should say he was a quarterback and then a tight end, and then became an All-American at tackle. Olive Songpolu, another Gary Anderson guy. Frederick Shaw was fine. Alex Hornibrook was part of that. But you go back down to the bottom of the list, and the lowest ranked recruited guy, was Alec Ingold, a guy who, was slow played by Gary Anderson and company. And I think him or Zach Bond were like going to be a gray shirt. It might have been Bond that was a gray shirt. I don't know, whatever it was. Like, they were not guys that were necessarily at the forefront of Gary Anderson's mind. And under Paul Chryst, in-state guys, and they become huge, big-time players for Wisconsin and still playing in the NFL right now. But it feels like the how many of those, the 2023 class, there was one in-state guy?
Yeah, it was Nate White, because it was a down year for recruiting in the state.
Yeah. So you do not have the loyalty that maybe a Zach Bond showed, right? Because he didn't play extensively until late in his career, right? Like he wasn't a full-time starter until a senior. He played some as a junior, but he wasn't a full-time starter until he was a senior. A little bit different for Alec Ingold, because they ran into so many running back issues in 2015 that they had to use him as a running back. But I think the in-state guys may be more willing to hang out and hang on. But also, it was much different time in 2015, where you had to go and sit out if you wanted to transfer someplace else. And right now, guys are looking for places to go and play right away. And if you're not going to play year one or year two and you don't see anything going forward, I think this is obviously what's going to happen. So I wanted to relay this because I think it is a good, I don't know if it's a good finish or not, but Thomas Hammock, who was the running backs coach at Wisconsin for, I believe, 4 seasons, late in Brett Bielema's tenure and then the first year of Gary Anderson's tenure. He's now the head coach at Northern Illinois. And he said this morning. He said, "This is my last food for thought, and I'm moving on from the topic. Yesterday, over 1,000 young men went into the portal. Next year, roster sizes will be cut to 105. Let's say the average team has 120 members. That's over 2,000 less roster spots. Quote, the math ain't mathin'." So it's a good one. It's a good one from him. I always enjoyed talking to Thomas Hammock, but he says what it is. There's a lot of guys that are in the portal right now that are not going to find homes. And I don't know that there's a lot of guys from Wisconsin that are transferring that are not going to find homes, but I certainly would think if you're a guy who's not playing at the MAC level and you're transferring, you might be out. And that's probably tough, but it was interesting. All right, Wisconsin's portal targets here. We've discussed and text back and forth about portal targets, but when you look at the number and you look at the guys that they're going after, a lot of defensive backs, linebackers, defensive line, one wide receiver, or at least I should say wide receiver. But it feels like certain areas we certainly are seeing them target what we would consider needs.
Very much so. It almost feels like an across-the-board attempt at upgrading other than offensive line, where they're set on numbers. And as far as I know, haven't seen anything in the running back room, even though I was a little interested to see, with only 5 scholarship players in that room, what they would do, since they had 7 last year. But they've got a couple young guys that really could be the future, and you don't want to disrupt that situation by bringing someone else in. No doubt, defensive line, quarterback, those are the top in my mind. But yeah, defensive back, they lost so many corners. We were talking about the 2023 class. Collectively, they lost every defensive back in that class, 6 of them, between safety and cornerback. So you've got to replace there. I think the linebacker ones are intriguing. I didn't know what they would do there. Very clearly, they want to be different off the edge. And so the names keep popping up in terms of offers and potential visits. And it's sort of a mixture. It's guys who played at the Power 4 level that maybe have a year or 2 left, and then you're trying to find quality at the FCS level. The challenge here, of course, is that so is everybody else. And so it's probably going to come down to the 2 things that it comes down to on the basketball side, is opportunity and money.
And certainly emphasis on the money part when we're talking about the quarterback spot. Those names have not necessarily jumped out. There are a number of guys that, you know, that are out there now, and some of the top guys like Malik Murphy at Duke and a Connor Wegman from Texas A&M, Miller Moss, USC, and then you have the guy down at Tulane and Darian Mensah. I've seen a number of people say Darian Mensah, and I'm just like, ESPN has them as their number one quarterback in the portal. How much is that going to cost? Is it going to be outside of Wisconsin's range? He's taken a visit to Duke. If some of these guys just don't feel like, and maybe we're going to be completely wrong, and there's some benefactor out there that is all of a sudden going to be throwing money at portal quarterbacks. And I know a lot of people are like, hey, big cat. Okay. Hey, that would be amazing if it ends up being the case. But I think that there's people all across this country that want to see their teams have better quarterback play. And all of them, I'm sure, have a lot of money to spend on some of these quarterbacks. So I don't know what an upgrade looks like for Wisconsin, but it's probably going to be in that 12 to 13 range like it was last year with Tyler Van Dyke. He was just outside the top 10 in most rankings for transfer quarterbacks. It's probably where it's going to be. But right now, there hasn't been definite names of offers and that type of stuff. I know Jackson Arnold was mentioned just because he was mentioned with everybody. But yeah, a lot of the guys that they have offered so far are guys that have multiple years. Mm-hmm. And that is certainly something that Luke Fickell has talked about in the past, where you don't want them just for, not talking quarterbacks, but I'm talking like other positions, have them multiple years so they can be developmental guys at the same time as, and trying to take advantage of those guys. But like the best example I would give is like a Nazir Forkering, who was not maybe he was coming off surgery, right? Like he didn't get to take part in the off season leading into his first year here. Took him a little bit, but then second year hit his stride and had a really good game or had a really good season. And I think he's a guy that's going to have potentially a chance to make an NFL roster next fall. So that's the type of guy you're looking for. One who has multiple years and maybe is hitting that stride year two.
When Luke Fickell talks about wanting to still be a developmental program, that may sound a bit like pie in the sky, but I think that development is likely going to come from portal guys who are looking for a second home that still have multiple years of eligibility. Just because we talked about with the 2023 class, guys may initially not see their path forward in the first couple of years, but you're getting someone that is more college ready because they've been developed to some degree at a previous school. And I realize that everyone is leaving for a reason. They're not happy with their situation. There probably weren't enough opportunities in a lot of those instances. But that to me is what I think developmental program looks like for the future for the most part. I do know that when we're having this conversation in a month, the roster is going to look drastically different, because if you look at what Wisconsin has done in the portal the first two off seasons under Fickell, I believe it's 15 scholarship guys that they ended up getting in both classes. And we've already seen how many scholarship guys have announced they're out the door. I'm pretty sure it's 15. So don't know what the scholarship numbers ultimately are going to be in terms of how many are remaining and how many they're going to hand out. But I would imagine it's going to be pretty similar.
How many guys from the previous coaching staff are still going to be left next year?
Well, good question. I mean, defensively, I know they had eight starters who were under the previous staff this past season, but you're losing a lot of that. Yeah. You're losing Kurt Neal, Hunter Wohler, Jake Chaney. Like you can go down the list.
Yeah, like Daryl Peterson, obviously former staff, and Riley Mallman, part of the former staff. Joe Brunner. I'm talking about guys that like are actually going to play, and scholarship guys. Jackson Aker, previous staff, and Aaron Witt, JP Benchwell. I guess the further you get down, there are some guys. Vinny Anthony, right? Austin Brown is a guy who was from the previous staff. But it gets pretty. Cade Yakimelli, it gets pretty thin. I think the further as you get down there. So this is going to be, and you talk to him. I shouldn't say you talk to him. You asked them about it when signing day was happening. These past two classes and all the stuff that you've done transfer portal wise. This is essentially going to be your team now. And speaking to Luke Fickell, it's essentially almost all these guys are going to be your people, your players.
Well, the commentary about things not going well is if you have that optimism, wait till he gets his own guys in. Wait till it's year 3 and year 4, and those young guys have been able to develop into upperclassmen. Well, now's your shot. So, the longer you're here, the more it's all your guys. And if you want to have excuses, you're running out of them.
Who wants excuses, Jesse? No one wants excuses. We're tired. Everyone's tired of excuses.
I'm not giving them any excuses. We've had to watch that product for a long time. But it doesn't get any easier. And with what's happening in the portal, it's a headache. But as Luke says, you knew what you signed up for when you came here, so you got to figure it out.
Did he, though?
Well, that's what he says.
I understand what he says. I'm sure he believes it. But I don't know that he understood because college has changed quite a bit since December 2022 or November 2022 when he took this job. It's changed quite a bit since then, and it's continuing to change. So I don't know that anybody knew what he was getting into when they made this move, but I do think that even unless it's like question for a future show, what has to happen for this just to get blown up? But we're not going negative. We're going positive. It's the transfer portal era, and Wisconsin's going to add a lot of really good players here over the next month, and then we'll see if they're any good come September or October. And maybe they'll have better odds, or maybe they'll have better luck than they did in last year's class. Jesse, thank you very much.
Thanks, Zach.
All right, there he is, Jesse Temple from The Athletic. You've been listening to The Camp.